Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Jesudasan for Tamil Culture and TC Talks. Today is Thursday, October 22nd, and a federal by-election for two ridings in the Toronto area is just around the corner on Monday, October 26th. One of those ridings is the riding of Toronto Centre. For those who don't know, that riding recently became open as a result of the resignation of Bill Morneau, former Liberal Finance Minister, and there are a number of exciting candidates running to fill that spot. I have one of those candidates with me who I'm very excited to talk about. I don't think she needs any introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. You probably know her from her extensive career as a broadcaster, as a journalist, from her 15 years co-hosting Canada AM, and more recently as the co-host of The Social. But today she's here with me as the federal Liberal candidate for the riding of Toronto Centre. Marci Ien, welcome.
Jessica, what a pleasure to be with you, and thanks for the introduction. And it's always lovely when people say she needs no introduction, but really I do. So thank you for being so generous with that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I guess I'm just used to seeing you on my TV screen, so. All right, and joining Marci, we have Malliha Wilson. Malliha Wilson is the president of the Markham Thornhill Liberal Riding Association, and she's here in support of Marci's candidacy. Malliha Wilson is a Tamil lawyer, Tamil-Canadian lawyer. She's a senior partner at Naval Wilson Law, and she also served as the Assistant Deputy Attorney General for the Government of Ontario from 2008 to 2016. Malliha, welcome. Always good to see you.
I'm thrilled to be here, and I think this is great that Tamil Culture is doing this, and I hope all the people watching will go out and vote. And obviously, I want you to vote for Marci, but we will get to that in due course.
Thank you, Malliha.
Of course. Well, the point of this hopefully is to inform the public, inform the Tamil community, and get them voting. And hopefully that's what we can accomplish today. All right. So Marci, big day is just around the corner, Monday, October 26th. It seems like just a few weeks ago, in fact, last month, I think, mid-September, that you announced that you'd be taking a leave of absence from The Social in order to take a run at the riding of Toronto Centre. I think for some people that may have come as a surprise, but for others it's maybe not so surprising given how vocal you've been throughout your career, but particularly in 2020 about the plethora of political and social issues that we as Canadians are really having to reckon with in 2020. It feels like a mirror has been put to our face in 2020, and the reflection looking back at us, it's not as cute as we thought. It's not so pretty. It's not as diverse and not as compassionate or inclusive as we as Canadians would like to think of ourselves, right? So why don't we start by telling us a little bit about how your 2020 is going and this shift that you're making from the world of journalism to the world of federal politics. Why now?
Yeah. So for all the reasons that you just outlined, Jessica, but I want to add some more context to that. I was a news reporter and anchor for many, many years. And with that job comes a neutrality, because it was my job to tell the stories of others. It was my job to listen and then present those stories to the country, write them and present them. When I started on The Social, my job changed, because all of a sudden it was an opinion-based show, and I was able to show and tell my story. And what my story includes as a Black woman living in Canada, and a country that I love so much, is the lived experiences. What I have faced, in my own career. I talked about the fact that in 30 years of broadcasting, I had never once had an executive of color, never a boss of color. That says something. I talked about, the lack of women in politics. I talked about the lack of diverse women of color in politics, BIPOC issues, so including, Indigenous issues, which are so important, inclusivity, LGBTQ2S plus issues. And as I talked about the issues on a show called The Social, people started to reach out. And a lot of people said, don't stop talking. Thank you so much for representing us. Thank you so much for bringing not just your issues and your lived experiences to the table, but bringing ours as well. And if you would have asked me a year ago, would you be sitting here right now as the Liberal candidate for Toronto Centre? I would have said, absolutely not. But it's interesting what happens when you start speaking out and speaking for yourself, but also others. And I should say, Jessica, when you are the first at something, And I was the first, Black woman in this country to co-host a national morning show. The doors that I walked through meant that I was bringing a community with me. It wasn't just about me. It has never been just about me. So when I looked at taking this run, I thought it's the exact same thing, except it's more than just speaking out about things. It would be a chance to actually put some action to the words that I'm speaking. And so to me, it's a progression. To me, it's a natural progression. I wouldn't have seen it. I wouldn't have seen it a year ago, but I want to keep bringing these issues to the fore, and I want to be in a position to actually make a difference and put some action to the words that I've been speaking.
Mm-hmm. It's like you said, it can feel like a burden, right? To be the first of anything.
I see it as a responsibility,
right?
Not really a burden.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not. Listen, it's not a responsibility that everybody wants, right? You can be the first at something. You can be a trailblazer and say, I'm blazing my own trail. It's not about anybody else. If people want to look at what I'm doing, that's fine. I don't want to be a role model. I never saw it that way. Mm-hmm. I embrace it. It's exactly what I want to do. It's exactly what I have done. So this isn't just about me. It's about all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about the riding, Toronto Centre riding. For those who don't know, it runs from east to west, from about Bayview Ave to Yonge, north to south, from about St. Clair to Queens Quay, and it encompasses the historically immigrant, refugee, and racialized communities and neighborhoods of St. Jamestown and Regent Park. And I think, Marci, you're from Toronto Centre, is that right? And I think specifically St. Jamestown?
St. Jamestown, yeah, Jessica, you're right. So my parents came to Canada to go to school. They came to go to school here and landed in St. Jamestown. So it is still a huge hub for immigrants, and it most certainly was in the late 60s. So that is where I was born and spent the first part of my life in St. Jamestown. And so this is why this is so full circle for me, that when this writing came up, I thought, my gosh, this is serving the community that opened its arms to my parents. This is where our family got its start. Mm-hmm. So very, very special to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I used to live in a dinky little box on Ontario Street.
Oh my gosh, I was born at 700 Ontario.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
I was at 500 something. It was a rental.
Oh my gosh, so we were very close. Yeah, it was a rental, lots of buildings around there, but we were right across from Rose Avenue Public School.
Look at that. Yeah. So I lived there when I was a summer student in law school. And when I say it was a box, but it was fine because I love the neighborhood. And, it was sort of a nice reprieve for me to be able to walk up the street to St. Jamestown and go to the Tamil store and get my curry leaves, get my box of mangoes, get my patties. All in about 10 minutes, because there is a significant Tamil community that also, set their roots there when we came first to Canada. So, Malliha, can you tell us a little bit about the significance of St. Jamestown and Regent Park to the Tamil community?
Yes, it's actually very significant. What happened is in 1983, there was a massacre, an attack against the Tamil people in Sri Lanka. Post independence, there has been an escalating violence against Tamil people, ethnic violence in Sri Lanka, and in '83 it culminated with the result that there were a number of people fleeing Sri Lanka, and Canada took in a number of refugees, many of whom came to Toronto, and many of whom settled in Regent's Park and St. Jamestown. It was the safe harbor for so many of our people. And I remember when I went canvassing with Bill Graham, another Liberal Party candidate at that time, and all of a sudden we saw Tamil people in these apartment buildings. And this makes it really important that Tamil people do get engaged in the electoral process, that they do vote for parties and candidates who will speak up for human rights and the safeguarding life. And, Marci has spoken about her background. She's from the area. And I cannot emphasize how important it is for Tamil people to get out and vote for her.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Marci, I think it's safe to say that, the face of neighborhoods like Regent Park and St. Jamestown, it's changed. It doesn't look the same way it did in the 80s or the 60s. It's changed for a number of reasons, one of which is the slow gentrification of the area, the lack of affordable housing, the rise of high-rise condos, and, also has to do with income inequality that sort of concentrates itself at the top percentile, and that usually that top percentile isn't really reflective of the makeup of our city. So, I think a concern that a lot of people in those communities have is there a place for us immigrant, refugee, racialized communities in St. Jamestown, in Regent Park, in the riding of Toronto Centre as it evolves?
Absolutely. Absolutely, there is a place. And you hit on a lot of good points there, Jessica. I have talked to so many people who say, listen, we want to be able to own our own houses. We want a piece of the pie too. Mm-hmm. And what they're saying is absolutely right. It's just getting there. It's understanding what it takes to get there. And that means more affordable housing. It definitely should not be a situation where people who have lived there, people who have worked there, people who have small businesses there shouldn't be able to own there, mm-hmm. because they are the lifeblood of the community. There is also, and I want to speak about the youth for a quick second, because in Regent Park, one of the first things that I did, because of COVID, it's hard to meet in person. So there have been a lot of Zoom meetings. And I had an excellent meeting with a group of young people who talked a lot about mentorship. And I mentioned this because they are trying to show other young people in the area how they were successful and the path. And I think it's important for people to see others meeting their goals and doing things in order to succeed themselves. So, for example, there were teachers on that call. There were community organizers on that call. There were artists on that call who were literally giving of their own money and their own time to show young people their craft and how they might get involved. And so while, yes, government is responsible as far as, making the pathways to housing and affordable housing and decreasing homelessness, and we are working on that. And the government has specific goals to cut it by 50% and to finally, hopefully eradicate it altogether. That's not going to happen overnight. But at the same time, I love that the community itself has taken action and said, you know what? Some of us have risen and we have chosen to lift as we rise, mm-hmm. to show young people that there is a way and to show them the way, because we have done it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That mentorship piece is
huge.
So
it's
important.
Huge.
Just to see someone who looks like you, that's done it.
To see it. Right? I've always said that in order to be it, you have to see it, right? Mm-hmm. And some people think, well, does that really mean? It does mean something. And for the youth of some of these communities who are choosing, let's just put it on the table, between maybe a life of violence, going a completely different path, and taking another path towards education, another path towards safety, another path towards building. It's a huge decision, and we have to get kids when they're young. I don't want to say it's too late, but it's harder when kids are 17, 18, 19 years old. It's getting them at an elementary level and having them see people who are doing it and having them strive towards those goals, and then equipping them with the means to achieve them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about one of the elephants, plural.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we can talk about Canadian politics in 2020 without talking about systemic racism and without talking about the COVID-19 pandemic. But let's start with COVID-19. It's ongoing. We are still very much in the midst of it. And it looks like we will be for the foreseeable future. People continue to have their hours cut or eliminated entirely as government restrictions and closures sort of, get updated on the fly as our information evolves. And that can be a really scary thing to have to live with that uncertainty. Yes, the federal Liberal government has introduced measures like the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, now the Canada Recovery Benefit, which has provided some relief to people. But, it's not necessarily free money. It is, after all, considered taxable income. And it's generally marginalized communities that have to rely on those benefits. Communities like the Tamil community that have traditionally worked customer-facing jobs at gas stations, at your local Timmy's, as PSWs, in plants and factories, at your favorite restaurants and the kitchens that are the most impacted by closures or being infected themselves with COVID-19. And we know that there's a stark correlation between who is getting infected in our country and race. In Toronto, the Black community is just 9% of the city's population. They make up 21% of COVID-19 infections. The South Asian Indo-Caribbean community, they are 13% of the Toronto population. They make up 20% of COVID-19 cases. That's compared to the white population in Toronto that makes up 48% of Toronto's population, and they're just 17% of COVID-19 cases. Those are really jarring statistics, and I think they really speak to who's really on the front lines and who's keeping our country running, right? So I think those people that have been the most hard hit are legitimately concerned about what a post-pandemic Canada, what a post-pandemic Canadian economy will look like for them under the federal Liberal government.
You're right about all of those things, and those stats are true to the south of us. And the one thing, Jessica, that we know for sure is that we don't have an end date here, right? There are this is a very open road. We don't have an end date. We can't say this is ending tomorrow. It absolutely is not. We can't say it's ending next week, next month, next year. There is no end date. So people need to know that nobody is sleeping right now, and this government has had to literally pivot quickly. So it is an ongoing situation where this pandemic has shown us exactly who's fallen through the cracks. And you're right, people of color are predominantly on the front lines. And this is why we're being impacted more, than others in our community. And what that means is that this government has to take care of those people. And so when you talk about post-pandemic, we can't say anymore that we don't know who's been impacted the most, right? So now we know it is up close, it is in front of us. So it is about building back better. And I have said, if there is anything, and I see it as a positive, if there's anything this pandemic has shown us, it has shown us exactly who has fallen through the cracks, whether it is people of color, whether it's our seniors, we've seen long-term care. We've got to build back better. And we absolutely will. Lessons learned. We absolutely will. So for example, there has been $10 billion set aside for an infrastructure program. This is a recent announcement. And I want to touch on the green aspect of this, because within that announcement, there's an announcement for green infrastructure and some 60,000 jobs. And so when I've been talking to young people, I was talking to someone last night who said, what about millennials? What about jobs for millennials? I said, here's the thing. You go where the jobs are, right? Your skill set, right? You take your skill set and you go where the jobs are. Green jobs is where it's going to be. Yeah. Climate change is still a huge issue. It is a crisis, and it is being addressed. So while there is money going towards those industries, and we have implemented, of course, single-use plastics in 2021 will be banned altogether. We continue to have a pricing on carbon tax. That money goes back to Canadians. I say, look at the industries where there are jobs, because there are some right now, and use your skill set to fill those gaps. But Jessica, I wish I had, answers to every single question as to, how we will take care of people who are on the front lines. But I will tell you this government has pivoted to make sure that it's put the health of Canadians first, and will continue to do so. And I also want to say, with regard to systemic racism, this is a government that has said, yes, it exists. And that is not true for every other leader in this country. Justin Trudeau has said it exists. We know it does. We have to do better. This is a system, and it's going to take a while to break a system down. But the first step when you have a problem is admitting that you do, and then you go from there.
Absolutely. And that's the second elephant in the room I want to talk about when we talk about Canadian politics is systemic racism in Canada, particularly against the Black community and Indigenous community. Marci, you've been very vocal throughout your career, particularly in 2020, about making discussions about these issues the norm, not the exception, not something we just talk about and then forget. And, you know, the importance of Canadians supporting the rights of the Black community and the Indigenous community. And, you know, I know you're no stranger to unwarranted police interactions yourself. In 2018, you wrote in the Globe and Mail about being stopped by the police in your own driveway, that being the third time in 8 months that you were stopped in your own neighborhood. You know, I think it's easy for Canadians to, you know, take those small daily injustices to dignity, to life, and wave it off as something that happens over there in the US, right? But it's not. It's not.
That's right.
Here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Black and Indigenous people. I mean, the list is saddening. You know, Regis Korchinski-Paquette, Jamal Francis, DeAndre Campbell, Ijaz Chowdhury, Chantal Moore, Rodney Levi, all who died in police interactions in 2020 alone. More recently, the death of Joyce Equishon in a Quebec hospital while in the care of racist hospital staff. They join a growing list of names, including Abdirahman Abdi, Sami Yatim, who have died in some capacity or other while interacting with the police. And a common thread linking all of them is mental health concerns, or most of them. Right? So, you know, I think it's clear now more than ever that there's a growing portion of the population that's frustrated and fed up, you know, with what seems like an apathy towards real change. You know, they don't want their federal leaders to get outside on one knee with their fist up. They want them to get up, get back in the office, and get to making that change possible, right? So, you know, Marci, you've been very active in the space. As you said, you've worked with youth quite a lot. You've worked in vulnerable communities. What are some of the shortcomings that you see in Canada when it comes to our approach to systemic racism? And how would you advocate as an MP for, you know, change that will get our country moving forward in the right direction?
Well, I want to address the first part of what you said, Jessica, because you pointed out so many things there. And that is understanding that it's not a question anymore as to whether, you know, systemic racism exists. It does. And what I found is, you know, after the death of George Floyd, I want to talk about that because there was so much discussion and continues to be discussion with so many Canadians pointing the finger and saying, hey, look at that happening over here. Isn't it great to know that we're not in the same boat? And, you know, there has been a complacency, there has been a comfort level in thinking that Canada is just fine. And what we know is that it's not. And so it was very important for me to talk about those things and to write about those things, as you mentioned, because we have to understand that we have our own issues here. And that is a huge, huge thing to first recognize that. So in speaking about these issues, we opened up conversations, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of using my microphone in a way, and it was a big microphone to say, we've got to do better. Listen up. Here are my experiences. If you don't want to listen to others, I can tell you some of my own, and I can tell you about every Black man in my family that has been stopped and not necessarily for the right reasons. I can tell you about my best friends. I can tell you about every, you know, Black man in my life that has been stopped, and ask the question why. And I also here, Jessica, want to talk about the trauma. And this is what people need to understand. It's the layers of trauma that people of color walk around with. You know, it is the injustices that are just kind of harbored and felt, and the whole idea that we just have to keep moving. So we hold them, right? But that trauma builds and it builds. And whether it rears its head in, you know, mental illness, whether it rears its head, you know, and depression is part of that. However it does. You know, we are not unscathed by these traumas. And when I was stopped on my driveway, that's the point that I was at, having been stopped so many times and having, you know, gone through my loved ones being stopped so many times. I was so scared that night. I was full of fear. And that's a point that I wanted to get across, because so many people said, well, what was the problem? What's the problem? Well, the problem is that I've seen others go through trauma before. And I, carry that trauma that may not be visible to the eye, but it's there. Mm-hmm. And so there are issues that people of color face even before, they may get stopped. It's the idea too of having kids, of having a Black son, and knowing that it's not a matter of whether he'll be stopped, but if. And the conversations that Black parents have to have with their kids about keeping both hands on the wheel when you're stopped and driving, about making sure that your insurance and ownership are outside of the glove compartment and are visible, so you don't have to make any sudden moves. These are the conversations that we have with our kids that, frankly, other people don't have to have. And these are the conversations that I had with Canada, because I talked about my lived experiences. And the last thing that I want to mention is, in doing so, in speaking up about all of these things, this is the candidate that the government wanted. They wanted the Marci that was speaking up and speaking out, not from a neutral standpoint, but from a standpoint of sharing, a standpoint of sharing my lived experiences and sharing the fact that I wanted and was asking and demanding us to do better.
Mm-hmm. Marci, you're right. Racialized people face a certain level of issues and racism in Canada, but nothing like what the Black community and Indigenous community have to face. Malliha, the town community, we just don't experience systemic racism in the same way or to the same degree. We just don't. We're not 20 times more likely to be shot dead by the police. We're not 6 times more likely to be taken down by a police dog. We're not 61% of all cases of police force that result in death. We're not. And when something doesn't affect you directly, it can be easy to just sort of shrug your shoulders of it and say it's a problem for that community. So, Malliha, why should the Tamil community, why should Tamil Canadians care about systemic racism in Canada, and how can we be part of that solution?
So, Jessica, I would challenge a couple of things. I think systemic racism is insidious. It's a form of racism that is not readily apparent as opposed to direct racism, but it exists in an institutional form. So if you have institutions that have rules or a dominant culture that looks at Blacks, at Indigenous people and people of color as the other, then they are going to get discriminated against, albeit in different forms. So Tamil people may not have directly experienced it, but I can assure you that they are experiencing it, but they are simply not aware of it. There is only one way to deal with systemic discrimination and issues of that sort, and it's exactly as Marci said, getting engaged and being courageous enough to speak out about it. As long as we as a community in Canada do not get engaged in the democratic process and vote for people who will speak up about these issues, and for a party that has acknowledged that there exists systemic racism, then we will always be behind. But if we get engaged, then the truth comes out and we will have a voice.
Absolutely. 2020 has been a wild year, to say the very least, and it's led to a demand for increasing calls for radical change, not the same sort of solutions that have been put forth over and over that kind of work in the cyclical way without really accomplishing anything. People want to see something happen, and they want to see it happen. It's not going to happen all in one go, but they want to see action taken now, right? And some of the issues, like you mentioned, Marci, it has to do with obviously systemic racism, Indigenous issues, income inequality, homelessness and housing, the climate crisis, issues that are not necessarily mutually exclusive. I see them as very interrelated. Marci, you're running up against Annamie Paul, who is a precedent setter in her own right, also another stellar Black woman who has recently been named the federal leader of the Green Party of Canada, and who some see as the kind of leader who can maybe deliver on some of those radical changes that they want to see. I think, in the past few years, there have been some legitimate concerns about the ability and the willingness of the federal Liberal Party to deliver on some of those changes and to genuinely incorporate the voices of its diverse MPs, who could very well be that much needed catalyst in order to achieve those changes and make them a reality. Some of those concerns have to do with SNC-Lavalin, the resignation of Jody Wilson-Raybould, the federal government's response early this year to Indigenous protesters protesting the construction of a natural gas pipeline through Wet'suwet'en land in BC, Selena Caesar-Chavana's decision to leave the Liberal caucus. I think people have legitimate concerns about whether the federal Liberal government is truly committed to the issues it says it is. So, in your view, Marci, is the federal Liberal government equipped, and are they willing to engage in that kind of radical change that's required to address the issues that are facing our country and facing the world?
Absolutely. And I think that we've shown that, and we've shown it in the response to COVID-19, to get a system in place that can help literally within days, literally, to get a system in place. And I talked to people who said, oh my goodness, I applied for CERB and 3 days later it was deposited into my bank account. Like, this is what was happening. To get a system in place that would help Canadians right away shows that this is a government that can adapt to change and adapt to it very, very quickly. And with regards to diversity, with regards to having, ministers and MPs that represent this country, I would point to Mona Monsef. I would point to, Ahmed Hussein, who has been such a mentor to me. This is a minister who is responsible for family and child services. And and former immigration minister, as a refugee himself, I think these are portfolios that are big portfolios. These are portfolios being led by people of color. This is a man who was born and raised and lived in Regent Park, who knows the community very, very well and has given back in so many ways and continues to. The fact that I'm here, the fact that I am the candidate, says something about where this government wants to go and where it sees itself in the future. Because the ultimate thing is, who's at the table, Jessica? Who is at the table, right? Who is representing this country? And the more diverse that table is, the better we are. That's where the radical change comes. The radical change is that I don't look like or have the background of anybody who is served as the Liberal candidate or Liberal MP in this government ever before, in this party before. I look different, my background is different. So this in itself is I would say, a radical change. Mm-hmm. And the ideas that we've talked about through this discussion are the ideas and the vision that I have for these communities in Toronto Centre. And so that in itself is change if Toronto Centre sees it fit to elect me. So I think not only are we on the right path, but we are ready to build back better, and we see the changes. And you know what? It's not even something that we can say that we see all of it now, because things are changing literally on a daily basis. So the ability to pivot, move, and react is something this government has done very well and will continue to do well. But I am not saying that these aren't issues that are big ones. They are big ones. I will also say, lastly, that it's going to take teamwork. And when I talk about teamwork, I talk about all three levels of government, because there are things like housing that crisscross jurisdictions, mm-hmm. right? And that means the willingness to work with other party members, regardless of which party they're with. So whether that is Kristen Wong-Tam at the municipal level, whether it's Suze Morrison, at the provincial level, I am willing to work together in order to achieve the goals that we need to move Toronto Centre forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It looks like we are nearing the end of our time together.
How did that happen?
I know. I don't know how that happened. My mind's buzzing, Marci. I have a whole lot of other questions, but I am conscious of time, so I do want to give both you and Malliha an opportunity to leave us with some parting words, a final message, and maybe address the importance of the vote here. I think particularly for immigrant and refugee communities, there's a habit or a pattern of voting historically for the same party, which might not necessarily be the most informed way to vote. So maybe you could speak a little to the importance of making an informed vote, particularly this year in the climate we're in, and the impact of our voice. Does our voice have impact?
Absolutely, and this is how we show that our voice has impact, by showing up and by voting. You know, I will say it is so important, and I have preached this, that we cannot leave, and we shouldn't have even considered leaving this chair empty. Toronto Centre needs representation, and needs representation right now. There are decisions to be made on behalf of this riding. This riding needs an advocate and an ally that will work to make things better for the people in it. And I want to let people know that I've heard you, I see you, I've lived it, and I will be here. And if I am the chosen person to represent this riding, that there will be an open door, that I want to hear from you, because this is very much a team process. I want you to know that, you know, you need to hold my feet to the fire and let me know what I'm doing, you know, right. But more importantly, you know, what you think I could do better. So I encourage people, you know, we were really encouraged to see that advanced polling went well, that people came out and they made sure that their voice was heard with their vote. We encourage them to do so. October 26th is around the corner. It is on Monday, and I would be honored to have your vote. And I hope that this discussion has showed you exactly why I deserve to.
Absolutely. Malliha, your parting words, your message for the people about the importance of the vote, particularly the Tamil Canadian vote.
So I think it is absolutely imperative that we get out and vote on October 26th, Monday, October 26th. And when we vote, we think about what we are voting for, what kind of Canada we want to see, and what role we see for ourselves. Obviously, we are people who have been victimized by human rights violations. We want to vote for a candidate and a party that stands up for human rights. And clearly, we have a very unique candidate here. I'm here because I happen to think that Marci is a fantastic candidate, unique. And when we get an opportunity like that, please go out and support change that is so positive. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Malliha. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, everyone, the federal by-election for the riding of Toronto Centre and York Centre, it's coming up this coming Monday, October 26, 2020. If you're not sure whether you're in that riding, you can check online at elections.ca. However which way you vote, as Marci mentioned, as Malliha mentioned, it's important now more than ever to use your voice, speak your truth, and create the kind of country that you want to see that serves everybody, not just you, but everybody, and most of all, the most marginalized among us, because when we all come up, when one of us comes up, we all come up. So that's all we have for today. My name is Jessica Jesudasan. Thank you, Marci Ien, Liberal candidate for the riding of Toronto Centre, and Malliha Wilson for being here with us. And we'll see you next time.
Jessica, thank you so much for your excellent questions and moderating. It was
my
stellar.
pleasure.
What an honor to be with you. Thank you so much. And Malliha, thank you.
Thank you, Marci. And thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Malliha.